Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to take a look again at Jungian existentialism and the notion of why existentialism and phenomenology are very important as we try to carry further our research into personality types. Now, before I move on to my topic, keep in mind that I have written a book on the INFJ type, the Ecstatic Soul. It's available at the Amazon links in the description box down below. If you have any questions, let me know. If there's a link that you need but can't find, let me know. It's available for less than $10, ebook and paperback format. Deepest investigation of the INFJ type that's currently available online. If you feel like you're hitting a wall with the new knowledge you're garnering from articles online, this is the place to go. So give it a try. Jungian existentialism. This is the first book of Jungian existentialism. I've been talking a lot about Jungian existentialism in the past, and you might ask yourself, why would I return to it? Well, in this video, I just want to give you a kind of systemic view from which, or with the benefit of which, you'll be able to understand why it's important to pursue that line of research, either by supporting it, by reading it, by engaging with it critically, or going even further if you feel up to it by writing your own works, whether it be on the INFJ type or ISTP, INFP, ISFP, ESFJ, ESTJ. You know, like, we need works of Jungian existentialism for all the types. It's a field that's very much in its infancy, and we have no guarantee at the present moment that it will become a full-fledged and informal research program, but I want to give you some ideas of why I think this is important. To understand why it is important, we ought to get a sense of where typological research is going at the moment. And I think that you will be no stranger to the fact, especially if you've been following various YouTube channels dedicated to personality. You're probably no stranger to the fact that the personality and typology field is constantly perceiving itself as needing to have a response to the scientist. More specifically, it needs to have, or it thinks that it needs to have, a response to the accusation of pseudoscience. So we're not going to return to it. This is something that we're pretty familiar with at this point. But it's interesting to look at the consequences of this worry. The consequence is that more and more people are starting to trust creators of typological personality models who claim to have a scientific approach. In other words, it seems that there is a race towards achieving a properly scientific status for personality theory. Objective personality is probably the best known example. I would have listed C.S. Joseph first, perhaps, if the reputation of the model hadn't suffered a bit in the last couple of years for reasons that I will not re-explore. But you also have cognitive type, cognitive personality theory, and some other models where, you know, these people coach customers, people who get in touch with them to understand more about their personality type, about the specificities of their types and subtypes, get some, you know, coaching, get some mentoring. All that is very well. I'm not saying that that's a bad development, but the movement is towards trying to claim as much scientific status for personality theory. And it's going to be more and more like this. Now, the advantages are the advantages that science offers from an empirical viewpoint. Objectivity, hence the name of objective personality for OPS, a neutral stance, predictive ability, and so on and so forth. and maybe the sense on the part of the customer that the services are reliable and that they obey certain implicit standards of scientific merit. But it leaves a gap, and this gap can only be filled either by a Jungian existentialism or by an approach that looks like Jungian existentialism but could merely be inspired by it. It's hard to predict the future. And why do I think this, and why do I think that this is inevitable? Simply because as the typology models move more and more toward the scientific status, less and less will they be able to capture the qualitative subjective experiences that are associated with types. And they're bound to exclude descriptions of these experiences from their purview because they cannot give an account of them in scientific terms. Exactly in the same way that scientists nowadays can explain more or less why the objective universe works the way it does, but they have great difficulty explaining consciousness. And a lot of scientists try to give a reductive account of consciousness in purely causal physical terms. But those who do not think that consciousness is nothing but matter and motion would and do, and there's many prestigious scientists and philosophers who think along those lines, Roger Penrose, David Chalmers and others, argue that something is lost in the account of human reality and experience when you reduce everything to causal reality and motion. The subjective experiences of seeing, watching a video, what it feels like to be you. Thomas Nagel, the philosopher in 1974, had an article, very influential article, called what it is like to be a bat. Who knows what it is like to be a bat? We can give a description of it, but that description of it, we can try to make it as objective and scientific as possible, is only a description. It's a representation of what it feels like to be a bat. It is not the actual feel-likeness of being a bat. And it's the same with you, with me, with other animals. What it feels like to be Ren, what it feels like to be you, the viewer. When you watch a beautiful landscape and it evokes certain imagery and feelings, the way that feels, what it feels like to have a pain, what it feels like to see a patch of red. There's an undeniable subjective experience of a qualitative nature there. The fact that it is epistemologically subjective does not mean that it is not ontologically objective. In other words, that it is not real. Something could be real, ontologically real, objectively real, and yet experienced subjectively. And that would apply to the qualitative experiences that we call qualia in the philosophical literature. This exact same applies with personality types. And that's what's very important to understand, is that once you give all the cognitive, maybe, have attained a perfect scientific description of the particular neural apparatus that contributes when the neurons are interacting the way they do and the synapses firing to produce a personality would be describing as an INFJ personality. Well, in the sense that it's a very scientific model and it's a very scientifically accurate description, but it has nothing whatsoever about what it feels like to be an INFJ. In other words, what is contained in this book is something that does not oppose science. It's not a book that argues against using a scientific empirical method, but it completes it. It fills in the side of the canvas that cannot be completed by a scientific account that of necessity must concern itself with objective facts of the matter at the expense of the reality of the subjective qualitative experience. And yet the subjective qualitative experience, I really suspect, is what matters most to people who come to research personality types. So it is possible that as time goes on, there will be more and more of a divide between the real interest, existential interest that people have in discovering more about their types, and the kind of information that the models that they will find as being the most reputable models, and deservedly so in their own field, the gap will widen. And The only way to bridge this gap is to say the scientific studies are all valid and modelers should seek to continue trying to make their theories more and more scientific when it comes to personality. But let's not forget about the subjective qualitative experience of what it feels like to be an INFJ in certain situations, and maybe have comparative studies of what it feels like to be an INFJ versus being an INTJ among the NI dominants, but also INTJ versus INTP, ISTP versus INTP, ISFJ versus INFJ, extrovert versus introvert. There's so many possibilities. This is the domain of what we could call phenomenological studies, studies of phenomena of the self, what it feels like to be a self of a certain kind. Now, this is exactly what Jungian existentialism envisions. So I've been thinking hard about this, and I know that this gap exists, and my aim is to fill it and to continue filling it. Because, like I said, scientific-oriented models are going to multiply. It's important not to make statements that contradict what's scientific. But it is perfectly possible within this domain of the subjective experience of consciousness to add knowledge, and people care about it. So that's the point of Jungian existentialism, and that's why I really seriously hope and encourage others to pursue in this particular field, because not only is it humanly extremely important, but people generally do care about it. So let me know what you think in the comments, guys. If you agree with me, disagree with me, if you understood my argument here, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.